For our top story tonight on Gravitas, we want to begin by asking a question. A question that has given sleepless nights to diplomats around the world. Say, if tomorrow the US and China go to war, who would press the nuclear button first? Would it be the United States or would it be China? And tonight we may have some answers. It looks like it would be China that would make the first move. That's right. China can vehemently say it maintains no first use policy, but revelations tonight blow the lid off the big holes in China's policy, it seems. A former senior aide to Donald Trump has made shocking revelations. We're talking about H.R. McMaster. He was Trump's national security advisor from 2017 to 2018. On Wednesday, in an event organized by the think tank Council on Foreign Relations, McMaster claimed that China had tapped the president-elect's phone, stolen extraordinary amounts of data, and was preparing for the first strike nuclear capability against the United States. Let me just repeat that bit for you. Former national security advisor of the US president has said that China wants nuclear first strike ability against the US. According to McMaster, America must impose very significant costs on China for its massive cyber intrusions, quote unquote. He said, and I'm quoting here further, they listened to President Trump's phone and everybody around him for 6 months, right? They have stolen extraordinary amounts of data, which we have found on our telecom networks, quote unquote. He told the event organized by the Council on Foreign Relations, quoting further, I believe that's what China is doing. And you might think I'm kind of crazy for saying this, but I think that China is laying the groundwork for a first strike nuclear capability against the United States, quote unquote. Now, for the unversed, first strike capability basically is the ability to launch a preemptive nuclear attack in the hope of damaging or destroying an enemy's nuclear arsenal and limit its ability to retaliate. And that's a major development, especially as McMaster's claims come 2 weeks before Trump's return to the White House. And there is already growing concern over China's expansion of its nuclear stockpile and cyber attacks. Now, just to be clear here, it's not clear if the comment about listening to Trump's calls referred to the reports in October last year. We're talking about reports that basically suggested that Chinese hackers linked to the Chinese government had targeted Trump's communications during the election campaign. And it's also not clear if it is a reference to previous claims that Chinese and Russian spies were listening to Trump's calls during his term in office. Remember, China has dismissed the most recent allegations as malicious speculation to reports that government-linked hackers targeted Trump's communications. Beijing responded saying that the US, quote-unquote, spread all kinds of disinformation about the so-called Chinese hacking threats. But what if what McMaster is saying is actually true, despite what Beijing is saying? You see, McMaster is also a former lieutenant general. He said that he had arrived at the conclusion that China was readying for a first strike capability against the US, judging from what China was doing from a cyber perspective. In fact, he claims that China is really developing at least a latent capability to take down US communications networks. And let's not forget, China is also ramping up its strategic forces. McMaster says that China's surveillance and intelligence collection capabilities had focused quite heavily on Washington's strategic forces. He said, and I'm quoting here, I mean, if that's the case, we should be quite serious about it, quote unquote. Just to be clear, China officially maintains a no first use policy for nuclear weapons. But the US, which ranks second in the number of nuclear weapons, has always had doubts about China's nuclear posture. But how many nuclear weapons does China have to begin with? Have a look at those numbers. With over 5,000 nuclear warheads as of 2024, the US clearly has a big lead over the rest of the countries on the list, except, of course, Russia, which has the highest number of nuclear weapons in the world. But it's the fact that China has been rapidly expanding its nuclear arsenal that has the Pentagon worried. In fact, China has accelerated its buildup of nuclear weapons, forcing the US to more than double earlier estimates of its pace. This has been reported by Pentagon's intelligence arm last October. According to the US Defense Intelligence Agency, China will have more than 1,000 nuclear warheads by 2030. More than 1,000, most of which will be able to reach the United States. Not just that, the US also still does not know why China has pursued such a large arsenal at such a fast pace. These developments are what make the US nervous. As for McMaster, the US needs to further develop its strategy to counter various forms of Chinese aggression, quote unquote, especially in the Indo-Pacific region. As global tensions rise, the nuclear rivalry between America and China is only going to intensify. You see, a stronger China with big improvements in its nuclear weapons raises serious questions about its intentions. But that, you see, applies to both the US and China. And so the question of who might be the first to use nuclear weapons cannot be taken lightly. Ultimately, the real challenge is not just guessing who might strike first, but making sure that this never happens at all.
To stay up to speed with the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.